Mbwana Chisulo didn't just reject his daughters, he erased them from his life as if they were sins he never wanted to confess. That truth struck like thunder the night two unfamiliar women walked into his collapsing mansion, their footsteps echoing through the hollow halls he once ruled like a king. His hands trembled as he stared at them, unable to understand why their presence made his chest tighten, why their eyes felt like memories he had spent 20 years burying. Outside, the wind howled against broken windows. Inside, the air thickened with something heavier than regret reckoning. For the first time in decades, Mbwana was forced to face the ghosts he created with his own cruelty. Aisha and Nuru, the daughters he had thrown away in his blind hunger for a son, and they had not returned to beg for love. They had come with a lesson he had spent his whole life avoiding. Before we dive deeper into this emotional journey, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? If you enjoy powerful African folktale dramas like this, feel free to subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow. 20 years earlier, long before the mansion rotted and the tiles peeled from its once pristine floors, Mbwana Chisulo stood as a man admired by the world and feared by his own family. Back then, his reputation was a wall of polished stone, uncracked, unchallenged, and unquestioned. People called him the Lion of Luanga, a man whose footsteps made subordinates scatter and whose voice could silence a room. Yet behind that powerful image lived a truth uglier than any poverty: his obsession with having a son. It began the night his wife Kalima gave birth for the first time. She had pushed through hours of pain, sweat, and prayers. The midwives cheered when the first baby arrived, a healthy girl with big brown eyes and tiny fingers curled like blooming petals. Before Kalima could even smile, the second child followed, another girl, pink-skinned and wailing as though announcing her presence proudly to the world. Twins, one of the midwives whispered, 2 strong daughters. The room brightened with joy except for Mbwana. He did not approach the bed. He did not hold the babies. He did not kiss his exhausted wife on the forehead. Instead, he stood rooted to the far wall, jaw, stiff eyes burning with disappointment, so sharp it cut through the air like a blade. 2 girls, he muttered, his voice low, dangerous. Not a single boy. The midwives exchanged nervous glances. One tried to hand him the first twin, smiling politely, but he brushed her off as if she were offering him a dead thing. Kalima's smile shattered. Mbwana, they are our daughters. He did not answer. He stormed out of the room, leaving the door swinging behind him, leaving the cries of his newborn children echoing through a space where their father's love should have been. From that day, Aisha and Nuru grew up learning that a father can be present in a house, yet absent in a life. They crawled around the marble floors, playing with each other, giggling, trying to get his attention. But whenever their tiny hands reached for him, he recoiled as if their touch infected him with shame. What have I done to deserve this curse? He often complained loudly enough for their young ears to hear. 3 generations of Chisulo men and I, the one destined for greatness, get girls. Kalima would gather the twins into her arms, whispering, "You are not curses, you are blessings. One day you will shine brighter than he ever imagined." But as the girls grew older, their father's rejection became harsher. Aisha, with her curious mind, loved following him around the estate, asking questions about everything. She once tugged on his sleeve and asked Papa, "Why does the sun follow us?" Mbwana slapped her hand away and shouted, "Go to your mother, girls must not disturb men." Nuru, softer and more sensitive, would cry each time. Not because he shouted, but because she could never understand what made him hate them so deeply. They tried harder, always hoping one day he would smile at them. He never did. Instead, he fed a dangerous belief growing inside him that only a son could carry his bloodline, inherit his empire, and prove to society that he was the powerful man everyone thought he was. "If I don't have a son," he told his brother one afternoon, "this family name dies. A daughter cannot lead. A daughter cannot stand as heir. A daughter brings only weakness." Kalima overheard him. That night she cried quietly, turning her face to the wall because she did not want her daughters to see tears they might believe were their fault. But children always know. Aisha and Nuru watched their mother's shoulders shake, watched her wipe her eyes and force a smile each morning. They learned early that love, when rejected, leaves scars that even time cannot fully erase. Still, Kalima tried her best. She filled their world with warmth, stories, and laughter, everything their father refused to give. She taught them resilience the way other mothers taught alphabet letters. When a door is slammed on you, she whispered to them, "Don't break it, build a new one." But life refused to ease its grip. One afternoon when the twins were 5, Mbwana invited several influential businessmen to a dinner party at the mansion. Aisha and Nuru, excited to see new faces dressed in their brightest dresses, hoping their father might finally introduce them proudly. Instead, when a guest asked, "Are these your daughters?" Mbwana forced a tight smile and replied, "Temporary inconveniences." Kalima nearly dropped the serving tray she was holding. The twins froze, young hearts cracking under the weight of words they didn't yet understand but would remember forever. That night they overheard him shouting at their mother, "You must give me a son. I cannot live this humiliation." Kalima begged him, "Children are gifts, not projects. You cannot demand what nature chooses." Mbwana slammed his fist against the wall. "Then nature owes me a boy." The pressure crushed Kalima until she could barely sleep. Yet when she discovered she was pregnant again, a spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe this time things would be different. Maybe this pregnancy would save her family. For months she prayed, whispered blessings into her belly and held her daughters tightly, assuring them they were loved, even if only by her. The day she went into labor, Mbwana didn't even wait by her side. He paced the hallway like a lion waiting for prey. When the cry of a newborn finally rang out, he dashed into the room, only to find the midwife holding a tiny baby girl. A second girl. Silence swallowed the room. Kalima sobbed before he even spoke a word. Mbwana's face hardened into something inhuman. He snatched his coat and hissed, "3 daughters, I'm done." He turned to Kalima, voice dripping with fury. "Get out! All of you. Take your girls with you." She stared at him in disbelief as he opened the door and pointed outward as though expelling curses from his home. "Mbwana, please," she whispered. "We have nowhere to go. They are your blood." He roared so loudly the newborn wailed in fear. Out. And so on a stormy night, when lightning fractured the sky, Kalima gathered her 3 daughters, 1 newborn, 2, trembling, and stepped into a world that offered them no shelter. Rain drenched their clothes, wind pushed against their weak bodies, but she held them close, whispering through chattering teeth, "One day, my girls, you will rise above this." Behind them, the mansion door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the years. Aisha and Nuru looked back only once, their eyes burning, with the first sparks of a fire that would one day change everything. The storm that swallowed Kalima and her daughters that night seemed determined to erase them from the earth. Rain crashed against their skin like punishment, wind whipped their clothes, and mud swallowed their footsteps as they stumbled farther away from the mansion they once called home. Kalima clutched the newborn to her chest while holding tight to Aisha and Nuru with her trembling free hand. Every few seconds she looked back, hoping, praying that Mbwana would come running out, shouting their names, realizing his mistake. But the night answered her with nothing but thunder. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the rain had soaked them to the bone. Aisha shivered violently, teeth clacking, and Nuru kept whispering, "Mama, I'm cold. Mama, I'm scared." The newborn's cries barely rose above the storm, fragile and desperate. Kalima took shelter under the broken veranda of an abandoned store. It was barely enough to block the rain, but it was all she had. She wrapped the newborn with her shawl, placed her gently in her lap, then pulled her older daughters into her arms. She forced her voice to stay steady as she whispered, "Everything will be all right, my loves. Mama is here. I will never leave you." But even in her warmest assurances, fear gnawed through her heart. She had no money, no home, no family willing to defy Mbwana's influence. And now she had 3 daughters who depended on her entirely. Aisha, still small but naturally observant, watched her mother's face and knew nothing was all right. She squeezed Nuru's hand, promising quietly, "Don't cry. We will be fine. I will take care of you too." The storm continued through the night, and Kalima did not sleep, not even for a second. By morning her lips were pale, her hands numb, but she carried her daughters into town. People stared with pity, shock, and whispers that followed them down the road. "Is that not Mbwana Chisulo's wife? He threw them out. 3 daughters. Poor woman." Kalima ignored the whispers. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She found temporary work washing clothes by the river. The pay was meager, but it was enough to buy porridge for the children. Each morning she left at sunrise, returning just before dusk, her hands cracked and raw from scrubbing. The girls stayed in a neighbor's shed, playing quietly with pebbles and sticks. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks became months. The newborn, whom Kalima named Kalia, grew slowly. She was frail, easily sick, and cried often from hunger or cold. Aisha and Nuru learned to help their mother. At 6, they were too young to shoulder such responsibilities, but they did anyway. Nuru held Kalia when their mother worked late, singing soft lullabies, so the baby wouldn't cry. Aisha walked to the market to buy leftover vegetables with the few coins her mother earned. One evening, Kalima returned home late to find Aisha stirring thin porridge over a small fire. Nuru rocked Kalia gently. Kalima's heart broke at the sight of her daughters trying so hard to survive a life they never asked for. She knelt beside them and whispered, "I'm sorry, my babies. You deserve more than this." But Aisha shook her head firmly. "No, Mama. We will be okay. We will grow up and make a big house for you. A house bigger than Papa's." Kalima smiled weakly, cupping her face. "My brave girl." Still, the emotional wounds ran deeper than poverty. The twins never forgot how their father's eyes looked at them, not with love, but with disappointment and disgust. At night, Aisha often lay awake, replaying the moment he called them temporary inconveniences. She didn't understand what made a son more valuable than a daughter. Why couldn't he love them? Why wasn't she enough? Nuru, on the other hand, carried her pain inward. She rarely spoke about her father, but her drawings sketched in dirt or on scrap paper always showed a small girl standing alone in front of a tall, shadowy figure. Kalima did everything she could to mend their spirits, but the world around them was cruel. Kids at the river teased them about being the daughters not good enough to keep. Mothers gossiped loudly about how daughters bring bad luck if a man wants an heir. One day, Aisha got into a fight with an older boy who shouted, "Nobody wants girls like you." He pushed her into the mud. Aisha stood up, fists, clenched eyes blazing. "My mother wants me," she said, voice shaking. "And one day the world will want me too." She didn't know it then, but that moment planted a seed inside her, a burning ambition that would one day turn her into a force powerful enough to rebuild and destroy legacies. As years passed, their life stabilized, but struggle never left. Kalima worked 3 different jobs. The girls grew up studying by candlelight, often going to bed hungry, yet they never complained. Aisha excelled in mathematics, winning school competitions despite having no proper supplies. Nuru developed a sharp eye for structures and would spend hours building houses from sticks and clay. Little Kalia, though weaker, absorbed her sister's strength and became the household's determined heartbeat. But there was one night that changed the course of their lives forever. Aisha was 12. Nuru was 12. Kalia was 7. They were all sleeping when a loud knock shook their small door. Kalima froze. Those knocks sounded too familiar. Heavy, commanding, Mbwana-like. Her heart pounded as she opened the door slowly. Standing outside was her brother-in-law, Hamisi. His expression was cold. "Kalima, Mbwana wants the girls back." The girls bolted awake. Kalima shook her head aggressively. "No, never. He threw us out like trash. My daughters will not return to that man." But Hamisi stepped forward. "He has no heir. He needs someone to carry the Chizulo name." Aisha felt her stomach twist. Suddenly she understood. Not even now did he want them as daughters. He wanted tools, names, proof that he still had power. Kalima shouted, "Tell him he can die waiting." Hamisi glared. "If you refuse, he will make life harder for you. He always gets what he wants." Aisha stood up, facing him bravely. "Tell him we will never be his daughters, not anymore." Nuru joined, her eyes steady. "We are our mother's children, not his." Hamisi looked at the 3 girls, then at their fierce mother. He sighed. "Very well. Don't say I didn't warn you." When he left, the silence in the room felt heavy. Kalima collapsed onto the floor, trembling. "He will not stop," she whispered. "He will make life even harder for us." Aisha knelt before her. "Let him try, Mama. We will grow up and build a life so big he cannot touch us." And that night, under a flickering candle, the twins made a vow, one that would shape the rest of their lives. "We will rise," Aisha whispered. "We will return," Nuru added. "And when we do," Aisha finished, "he will finally learn what daughters are worth." The years that followed were not merciful, but they were transformative. Hardship became the fire that shaped Aisha, Nuru, and little Kalia into steel. Every dawn began long before the sun rose, with Kalima quietly preparing for work. Her fingers numb from the river's icy water, her back aching from lifting laundry baskets twice her weight. She often paused in the doorway, watching her daughters sleep curled together like fragile birds, and whispered prayers over them. Let their future be kinder than their past. Her daughters, however, had long since stopped hoping for kindness. They wanted strength, they wanted change. And above all, they wanted to become the women their father believed they could never be. Aisha grew into a young woman with eyes that noticed everything and forgot nothing. She studied under broken lanterns, devouring books borrowed from teachers, constantly pushing herself beyond limits. Numbers became her sanctuary. She solved problems faster than her teachers could assign them. People whispered that she had the mind of a king, unaware of the irony that her father had thrown her out precisely because she was born a girl. Nuru, on the other hand, blossomed with artistic intensity. She collected discarded wood pieces, broken tiles, and torn fabric to design miniature houses and structures. Her hands were always stained with glue or charcoal. Whenever she built something, Aisha could see their future in the tiny models, strong walls, beautiful windows, and roofs that no storm could tear apart. Kalia, though still fragile, had a spirit that refused to break. She watched her older sisters every day, determined not to slow them down. She studied hard, learned fast, and pushed herself even when her health faltered. Whenever she felt weak, she reminded herself of the night their father abandoned them, how Aisha shielded her from rain, how Nuru sang to keep her warm. "Our family doesn't fall," she would whisper to herself. "We rise." But life had a bitter way of testing their resolve. When Aisha turned 15, Kalima collapsed at the riverbank during work. Her friends rushed her home unconscious and burning with fever. Aisha and Nuru sat by her bedside all night, exchanging frightened glances. They could not afford a hospital. They barely afforded food. It was Nuru who broke the silence first. "We need money, Aisha. Real money." Aisha swallowed hard. "I know." She looked at her sisters, Kalia crying softly, Nuru with trembling hands, and made a decision that would alter the course of their future. The next morning, Aisha walked to the market and approached a woman known for running small businesses. "I want to work," she said confidently. "I learn fast, I don't complain, and I need to earn." The woman raised an eyebrow. "A child like you, what could you possibly do for me? Whatever you need," Aisha replied. "Try me." The woman laughed, but there was something fierce in Aisha's tone that caught her attention. She gave her a job carrying goods from suppliers to her stall. The work was exhausting, but Aisha pushed through it with determination that surprised everyone. Soon she moved on to managing stock, calculating costs, predicting sales, and eventually reorganizing the entire business for higher profit. Within months, she became indispensable. Meanwhile, Nuru began offering her sketching services at the market, drawing floor plans, sketching renovation ideas for local vendors, helping them redesign their stalls. Her talent spread quickly. People started paying her real money for her visions. Even Kalia contributed by helping neighbors with small tasks and errands whenever her health allowed. Together, the sisters stabilized their household. Kalima recovered slowly, her pride wounded but her heart full of gratitude. One evening, while the girls sat around the small cooking fire, she said softly, "You three have done more than any children should ever have to. I'm sorry I couldn't give you an easier life." Aisha reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, don't say that. You gave us everything that mattered." Nuru nodded. "We are strong because of you." But in their hearts, all three daughters carried a silent vow one day. They would build a future where Kalima would never have to apologize for surviving. The turning point arrived when Aisha was 17. She had saved enough money to apply for scholarships at one of the top colleges in the region. Her application essay, detailing their fall from wealth, their struggle, and their rising resilience, caught the attention of the admissions board. When the acceptance letter arrived, Aisha screamed so loudly that neighbors came running. She clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I did it," she whispered. "We're finally starting." Nuru received a scholarship the following year in architecture and urban design. Her portfolio impressed even the toughest professors. She presented her first major project, a blueprint for affordable housing in underdeveloped neighborhoods, and received a standing ovation from her class. And though Kalia was younger, she followed closely behind, slowly building her own path in social work and community development. During these years, Mbwana never once tried to contact them again, not out of shame, but because he refused to acknowledge they existed. To him, they remained failures, disappointments, reminders of his humiliation. But destiny never forgets. By their early 20s, Aisha and Nuru had graduated top of their classes. With a few grants and investors impressed by their background and talent, they launched a small company focused on renovating low-income homes. At first, people doubted them, two young women trying to build a business in a male-dominated industry. But Aisha possessed the strategic brilliance of a seasoned CEO. Nuru had the visionary mind of a world-class architect. And Kalia, despite still battling health challenges, became their emotional anchor and moral compass. Slowly, project by project, their company grew. Within 2 years, they became known across the region as the brilliant sisters transforming the lives of struggling families. Their client list expanded, their profits soared, their influence spread, and for the first time in their lives, they tasted the sweetness of success earned through pain, sacrifice, and unbreakable unity. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of their new office building, overlooking the town that once pitied them, Nuru whispered, "Do you remember the vow we made?" Aisha nodded slowly. Yes, we said we would rise, Nuru continued. And we have, Aisha replied. Nuru's voice softened. We also said we would return. Aisha's expression hardened not with bitterness, but with clarity. Yes, she said. And now, we're ready. Below them, the lights of the town flickered like stars. Somewhere in the distance, in a mansion that had once cast them out, an old man sat alone, clinging to pride that had long since begun to crumble. The daughters he rejected were no longer children. They were storms, and their return would change everything. Success didn't arrive like a miracle. It came like a storm the sisters had summoned with their own hands. Their company, Rising Roots Development, became a symbol of transformation, and everywhere Aisha and Nuru went, people spoke of them with admiration. Yet beneath the applause, beneath the spotlight, lived a truth. They never vocalized every step upward was also a step closer to the man who once deemed them worthless. Aisha now, a focused, sharp-minded businesswoman, stood at the helm of their growing enterprise. She had the presence of someone who didn't just survive her past, she mastered it. Meetings with investors rarely lasted long. Her confidence, her strategic clarity, and her unbreakable resolve made powerful men twice her age sit straighter in their chairs. You understand numbers like they're alive, one investor once told her. Aisha only smiled. Numbers obey logic. People obey pride. I learned that distinction very young. Nuru complemented her perfectly. While Aisha led with intellect, Nuru led with vision. Her designs captured the soul of communities. She believed houses shouldn't merely shelter people, they should restore them. Her projects blended modern structures with African design traditions, creating spaces that felt rooted in history, yet hopeful about the future. Together, they became unstoppable. But even as they rose, life continued to test them. Aisha discovered early that the business world rewarded brilliance, but punished vulnerability. In meetings, older male executives often addressed her as little girl, assuming she was the assistant rather than the CEO. She didn't waste time proving them wrong with words, she destroyed their assumptions with results. By the time the financial reports were laid out, no one dared underestimate her again. Nuru faced similar challenges. Contractors refused to take her instructions seriously until they realized she could read structural flaws faster than any engineer on site. Once a contractor mocked her design publicly, calling it too ambitious for a woman. The project ended up winning a regional award, and people remembered her name. Meanwhile, Kalia carved her own path. Though she battled chronic fatigue and a weak immune system since childhood, she found strength in helping others. She volunteered in underprivileged communities, organizing workshops for children who had no access to education. She rarely appeared in the business spotlight, but within the family, she was the glue that held their hearts together. You two fight too much, she would scold Aisha and Nuru when they clashed over business decisions. Remember why we started. Not for pride, but for Mama. Their mother Kalima watched from the sidelines with pride swelling in her heart. She could hardly believe the empire her daughters were building. Yet whenever the newspapers praised the unstoppable Chizulo sisters, her heart tightened. That name, the name belonging to the man who brought them into the world but refused to be their father. One afternoon, as the sisters prepared to bid for a large government housing contract that would catapult them into national recognition, Kalima approached Aisha quietly. "Child," she whispered, "success is good, but don't let ambition drown your soul." Aisha softened. "Mama, everything we're doing is for us to stand tall in a world that once crushed us." Kalima nodded slowly. "Yes, but remember that the higher you climb, the more the past tries to pull you back." Aisha didn't respond, but her heart tightened. She knew exactly what her mother meant. The past had a face, a voice, a name, Mbwana Chisolo. Still, they pushed forward. The government contract bid was fierce, with several large companies competing for it. Winning meant expanding across borders. Losing meant stagnation. The sisters poured every ounce of effort into their proposal. Nuru redesigned an entire community blueprint from scratch houses with natural light, communal gardens, accessible walkways, and sustainable materials. She stayed awake for nights, sketching, erasing, refining. Aisha managed budgets, partner negotiations, and legal structures, turning the project from an idea into a masterpiece of planning. Kalia reviewed their community impact segment, adding emotional strength through stories of families who desperately needed proper housing. Their proposal stood out not because it was perfect, but because it came from lived experience. They knew what it meant to have no home. They knew what it meant to rebuild a life from broken pieces. Weeks later, the results arrived. Rising Roots Development won. The announcement felt like an earthquake in the industry. Journalists flooded them with interview requests. Investors doubled their offers. The public cheered for the three daughters who rose from a legacy of rejection and turned it into triumph. That same week, while reviewing potential construction sites for the project, Aisha stumbled upon a name on one of the land ownership documents that made her blood freeze. Chisulo Estates Incorporated, a subsidiary of their father's assets. She stared at the name for a long moment, emotions tangling inside her chest, anger, disbelief, a strange sense of inevitability, so she murmured, "Our paths cross again." When she brought the document to Nuru, her sister's reaction was immediate. "No," Nuru whispered. "This cannot be coincidence." Kalia, sitting at the table, placed her hand on theirs. "Maybe it's time." Aisha clenched her jaw. "Time for what revenge?" Nuru shook her head. "No. Time to face the past." But Aisha wasn't ready. "He doesn't deserve a place in our story." Kalia spoke gently. "But he already has one, Aisha, whether we like it or not." That night, Aisha sat awake, long after everyone slept, staring out the window. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the room, and memories long buried began to resurface. Her father's face, twisted with anger, his voice spitting venom, his hands shoving them out into the rain, her fists clenched. "He threw us away," she whispered into the darkness. "We owe him nothing." But even as she said it, she felt an uncomfortable truth stir inside her. They were about to enter a higher circle of business, one where reputation, alliances, and networks mattered. Crossing paths with Mbwana was no longer a matter of emotion. It was inevitable. And when it happened, she vowed it would be on their terms, not his. Over the next year, the sisters expanded their company with breathtaking speed. Their government project became a national model for low-income housing. Investors poured in. Their faces appeared on magazine covers. Conferences invited them as keynote speakers. They were no longer just successful, they were defining the future of community development. But with success came new attention, new scrutiny, and new enemies. It wasn't long before whispers began reaching them through the business. Grapevine Chisulo Estates is collapsing financially. Mbwana's investments failed. He's selling off properties. He's desperate. The sisters didn't speak of it openly, but each of them heard the same whispers. One evening, Nuru found Aisha alone in her office, staring at a map of their upcoming projects. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Nuru asked. Aisha didn't look up. "If his land becomes available, we'll have to negotiate." Nuru stepped closer, not as his daughters. Aisha finally met her eyes. No. As the women he underestimated, a slow, deep breath filled the room. For the first time in their lives, they were not running from their father. They were approaching him powerful, unbroken, and ready. "He rejected us for not being sons," Aisha whispered. Nuru nodded. "Then we'll show him what daughters can become." Kalia's voice drifted from the doorway, gentle but resolute. "When we return, it won't be as children." The sisters turned to her. Kalia's eyes glimmered with quiet fire. "We will return as storms." And in that moment, an unspoken truth settled between them. Their rise was no longer just a personal journey. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The rise of the Chisulo sisters, Aisha, Nuru, and Kalia, didn't merely attract admiration. It stirred the entire nation. Newspapers hailed them as the three phoenixes, women who rose from ashes into power. Their story inspired thousands of young girls, reminding them that destiny was not inherited, it was built. But while the world celebrated them, another story unfolded in the shadows. A story of a man who once feared now trembled at the edges of ruin. Mbwana Chisulo, the lion who once roared over Luwanga, had grown frail. Not in body, he was still tall, still broad-shouldered, still intimidating on the surface, but in spirit. And like all wounded lions, he grew more desperate the weaker he became. His company, Chisulo Estates Incorporated, had been bleeding for years. Bad investments, fluctuating markets, and his own pride had led him to gamble millions on projects he didn't fully understand. His advisors warned him repeatedly, "Diversify, Mr. Chisulo. Don't put everything into one venture. Let's reassess the risks." But he silenced them. "I don't need lectures. I need a son, a real heir. That is the only legacy that matters." So he ignored the numbers, and the numbers responded with vengeance. His lands depreciated, his unfinished properties rotted, and debts accumulated like flies swarming a carcass. Investors pulled out. Banks closed their doors. Business partners whispered behind his back. Worst of all, the last woman he tried to marry, whom he believed would give him the son he craved, vanished one night, taking a substantial portion of his liquid assets with her. Humiliation replaced pride. Fear replaced dominance. Regret replaced arrogance. And yet even as the cracks widened in his empire, he clung to an illusion. I will rise again. A Chisulo always rises. But he had forgotten something vital. He wasn't the only Chisulo anymore. Meanwhile, Aisha, Nuru, and Kalia stood at the peak of their momentum. Their government project had been so successful that they were invited to present it at the International Housing and Development Summit. When they walked into the auditorium, cameras, flash journalists surged forward and the audience erupted in applause. We're honored to welcome the leaders of Rising Roots Development, Africa's pioneering family of innovators, the host announced. Aisha stepped onto the stage with calm confidence. Nuru followed with her portfolio and model blueprints. Kalia carried the emotional core of their presentation, real stories from families whose lives had been transformed. Their speech was powerful. Aisha presented numbers with compelling clarity. Nuru unveiled award-winning designs that left the audience in awe, and Kalia spoke with tears that ignited tears in others. By the end of the summit, international investors were practically begging to work with them. But while their success soared, there was a moment afterward that altered everything. As they stepped off the stage, a tall, gray-haired man approached Aisha with an extended hand. Congratulations, Miss Chisulo. Extraordinary work. Aisha stiffened. She never used that surname. She turned slowly, her pulse thudding. He continued, I'm a financial consultant. I work with restructuring for companies in crisis. His eyes softened. And I believe you may be interested in this. He handed her a folder. The first line punched the breath out of her Chisulo Estates Incorporated. Request for urgent acquisition partners or buyout options. Nuru stepped beside her and read over her shoulder. She inhaled sharply. Kalia's eyes widened. Is this? The man nodded. Yes. The company is sinking. The owner is running out of time. The sisters exchanged a long, silent look. Their moment had come. Not by choice, by destiny. That night, the sisters met in their home office. Aisha laid the file on the table like a relic from a forgotten past. We knew this day would come, she said quietly. Nuru sat down, her expression solemn. But we didn't expect it so soon. Kalia closed the door behind her. What do we do now? Aisha hesitated, then answered. We consider buying the company. Nuru's eyes widened. You want to own his empire, not because we need it, Aisha replied, because it's a piece of our story, and we're done letting him control it. They studied the financial documents in silence. The numbers were worse than expected. Chisulo Estates was drowning. The company had only 3 options: sell, declare bankruptcy, or collapse entirely. Kalia eventually whispered, If we buy it, we'll have to face him. Aisha closed her eyes. I know, Nuru leaned forward. But Aisha, what if he still hates us? What if he refuses? Aisha's voice hardened. We're not going as daughters. We're going as businesswomen. Silence fell again until Kalia spoke softly. This is not revenge. Aisha met her eyes. I know. It's just as Kalia finished. 2 weeks later, they requested a meeting with the board of Chisulo Estates. The board members, 5 older men who once bowed to Mbwana, walked into the conference room with sagging shoulders and tired eyes. They recognized the sisters immediately, their expressions, a blend of shock and regret. You are Kalima's daughters, one murmured. Her strong girls, another whispered. The oldest member cleared his throat. Does your father know you're here? The room fell silent. Aisha answered first, he will. Nuru placed a folder on the table. We're offering a full acquisition of your remaining assets. The men exchanged startled looks. One of them whispered, Do you understand what this means? Your father, Aisha, cut him off gently but firmly. Our decisions no longer revolve around him. We're here because the company has potential. Potential we can rebuild. The oldest member studied them carefully. Your father's pride won't survive this. Aisha's expression did not waver. He survived, throwing us into the storm. He'll survive this meeting. There was no malice in her words, only truth. The board approved the proposal unanimously. It wasn't until the next morning that the inevitable happened. Mbwana stormed into the boardroom, face red with fury, eyes wild with disbelief. He slammed the acquisition documents onto the table and shouted, Who approved this? Who allowed my company to be sold to? He froze. Aisha stepped forward. Nuru remained still holding her ground. Kalia stood behind them, calm but unyielding. For a full 10 seconds, Mbwana didn't breathe. You, he whispered, staring at their faces as if seeing ghosts. It cannot be, Nuru spoke first. It's us, father. The word father tasted like rust, broken and painful. Aisha added, The daughters you threw away. Mbwana's fury faltered. His breath hitched. His voice cracked. Why? Why would you buy my company? Aisha answered with unwavering resolve. Because you built it with pride, Nuru added, and we will rebuild it with purpose. Kalia stepped forward last. We didn't come to take your name. We came to take back our future. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Mbwana's knees nearly buckled. For the first time in his life, he was facing his daughters, not as burdens, not as disappointments, but as the powerful women he never believed they could become. His hands trembled, his voice broke. My daughters, my girls. Forgive me, Aisha held up her hand. We didn't come for forgiveness, she said. But forgiveness, Nuru whispered, might come later. Kalia finished gently. For now, we came to start the lesson you refused to learn. And that was the moment it happened. The fall of the lion. The rise of the daughters. The beginning of the reckoning. Mbwana Chisolo had always believed he was untouchable. A man of his stature, feared, admired, envied, did not fall. At least that was the myth he repeated to himself for decades. But on the day his daughters sat across from him in the boardroom, he once dominated, the myth cracked. And behind that myth was a man who was terrified. His voice trembled as he sank into the leather chair at the end of the long table. He looked smaller than the man the sisters remembered, more fragile, more human. Yet even fragility could not hide the pride that clung to him like old perfume. Aisha watched him carefully. She could see the war inside him, shame battling denial, ego fighting, fear memories colliding with regret. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Mbwana cleared his throat. Tell me, why would you do this? Why would you buy my company to punish me? Aisha folded her hands calmly. If we wanted punishment, we wouldn't have paid for it. Nuru leaned forward. We offered a fair price. You need the money, we need the land. This is business. Kalia, ever gentle, added softly, we didn't come for revenge, but her voice carried something deeper, something unspoken, something he felt. Mbwana swallowed hard. I never expected this. Never thought I would see his voice cracked, but pride forced him to straighten. But you cannot run this company. You do not understand the Chisolo legacy. Aisha's eyes sharpened. We understand it perfectly. That legacy built your ego and destroyed our family. Her words landed like stones thrown into still water. Nuru raised a folder. These are your financials. You're months away from bankruptcy. The banks have lost faith. Investors are gone. Staff numbers are half what they used to be. And your debt, Mbwana slammed his palm on the table. Stop, you think, I don't know. Kalia flinched slightly. Nuru placed a protective hand on her arm. Aisha kept her voice steady. Knowing is not the same as admitting. He glared at her, but the truth in her words silenced him. A heavy fatigue settled in his eyes. What do you want from me? Aisha exchanged a look with her sisters before answering. Nothing. We want nothing from you except cooperation for a smooth acquisition. He blinked. You're taking over everything. Aisha nodded. Yes. The words shattered what remained of the man's pride. He slumped back, breathing unevenly. Everything I built, taken by the daughters you rejected, Nuru finished. He closed his eyes tightly as if the truth physically hurt him. Within weeks, the acquisition was finalized. The news spread like wildfire across media outlets. 3 sisters acquire Chisolo estates in historic. Takeover man's forgotten daughters rise. To save his collapsing legacy, a lesson in pride, the fall of a tyrant, the rise of his daughters. Public devoured the story. Some cheered for poetic justice. Some pitied the disgraced patriarch. Others praised the sisters for grace and restraint. But for Mbwana, the humiliation was more than public, it was personal. As debts were settled and properties transferred, he watched his life unravel like a frayed rope. Rooms he once commanded now belonged to Aisha. Offices he once ruled now echoed with Nuru's voice directing engineers and architects. Files he kept locked were examined by Kalia, her soft-spoken questions revealing his carelessness and mismanagement more clearly than any insult ever could. His pride was no longer wounded, it was bleeding. And yet somewhere amidst the humiliation, something strange began to shift. He found himself watching his daughters, watching the way Aisha stood with authority he once believed only sons could possess, watching the way Nuru's brilliance drew admiration from architects and planners across the region, watching the way Kalia spoke gently yet carried the moral backbone of the entire operation. He watched, and for the first time in his life, he wondered, what would my world have looked like if I had loved them instead of chasing a son? But before reflection came consequences. One afternoon, Bwana returned to the mansion, a shell of its former glory. Rain leaked through cracked ceilings, paint peeled from the walls. Furniture was draped in dusty sheets. The once polished floors were now faded and dull. The empire he abandoned his family for had abandoned him back. He stood in the foyer staring at the portrait of himself that still hung over the fireplace. A younger, prouder version of him. A man who believed power was permanent and daughters were worthless. He tore the portrait down. It crashed onto the floor, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. He sank to his knees among the broken shards, gripping the frame, as if trying to squeeze the past back into its original shape. "What have I done?" he whispered. But the silence held no answers. Meanwhile, the sisters were facing challenges of their own. Chisolo Estates was in far worse condition than the documents had shown. Fraudulent contracts, unpaid workers, abandoned sites, missing funds corruption ran deeper than they expected. "We can fix this," Aisha said, though exhaustion lined her face. Nuru rubbed her temples. "But it will take years." Kalia frowned. "And he's still living in that collapsing mansion." Aisha sighed heavily. "I know. But he refuses to leave. We offered to relocate him to a safe house. He yelled at me, said I was trying to steal his throne." Kalia whispered. "He doesn't have a throne anymore." Nuru nodded. "Just ghosts." The sisters worked late into the nights, balancing their own company with the mess their father created. Exhaustion built, stress mounted. But they refused to give up. Because their mission was no longer just about business. It was about rewriting a legacy. Not for him, for themselves, and for the mother who sacrificed everything to raise them. One evening, the sisters received a call. It was from their late mother's closest friend, Aunt Yambi. Her voice shook with urgency. "Girls, you need to come. It's your father. Something is wrong." The sisters rushed to the mansion. They found Bwana sitting alone in the dark, surrounded by shattered picture frames, unpaid bills, eviction notices, and whiskey bottles. His hair was unkempt. His eyes were hollow. His clothes wrinkled. He looked nothing like the man who once towered over them. When he saw his daughters, he froze. Aisha's heart clenched. She had expected anger, arrogance, defiance. But what she saw was grief. Nuru knelt slowly beside him. "Father, what happened?" He stared at her hand but did not take it. Instead, he whispered, "I have nothing left." Aisha spoke quietly. "You still have us if you choose to." He flinched. "Do I deserve that?" Kalia stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe not, but we came anyway." His eyes filled with tears, not loud tears, but quiet, defeated ones. "My daughters," he whispered, voice cracking, "I have spent my life chasing a son, only to realize the true heirs were standing before me from the beginning." The sisters exchanged emotional glances. For the first time since childhood, the wall between them and their father began to crumble, not fully, not easily, but undeniably. Aisha inhaled deeply. "This isn't forgiveness," she said gently. "This is the beginning of understanding," Nuru added. "And understanding takes time," Kalia whispered. "But we're here, and we're not running." Mbwana lowered his head, overwhelmed. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, the same kind of rain that once drove them into exile now, cleansing the ruins of the past. Inside, for the first time, the Chisulo family sat together, broken, hurt, yet finally facing the truth. And the true collapse, the emotional one, had only just begun. The rain that night fell softly, but inside the broken mansion, a storm greater than anything outside raged silently. It lived in the air between the Chisulo sisters and the father who had once expelled them from these very walls. The flickering light from a single failing lamp cast uneven shadows across the room, revealing every crack on the peeling walls, every wrinkle on Bwana's face, and every emotion the sisters tried to keep steady. Aisha stood with her arms crossed, not defensively, but to hold herself together. Nuru sat beside their father, not touching him, but closer than she ever thought she'd allow herself to be. Kalia remained standing behind them, her calming presence grounding the moment. For several long seconds, no one spoke. It was Mbwana who finally broke the silence. Why did you come tonight?" he asked, his voice small, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. Aisha answered without hesitation. "Because we were told you weren't well." He scoffed, though the sound lacked strength. "And you cared." Aisha opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her chest. Caring wasn't simple. Not after everything he had done. Not after 20 years of absence, cruelty, and indifference. But she also couldn't deny the ache of seeing him like this, broken alone, drowning in the ruins of his choices. Before she could form a reply, Nuru spoke softly. We didn't come out of affection. We came out of responsibility. He blinked, wounded by the honesty. But Nuru continued, responsibility doesn't come from blood. It comes from the values Mama taught us. She never taught us to hate. At the mention of Kalima, Mbwana's hands trembled. He clenched them tightly, his knuckles whitening. She was a good woman, he whispered. She was more than that, Kalia said, stepping forward. She carried this family alone. She raised us in the shadow of your rejection. Mbwana squeezed his eyes shut. Shame washed over him so strongly that his shoulders hunched as though the weight of his past finally found a place to land. Aisha inhaled deeply and finally said, We're here because you're our father. Even if you never wanted us. His eyes snapped open, and for the first time he looked directly at her, really looked. Aisha, tall and poised, radiating power. Nuru calm, yet unbreakable. Her face soft, but her eyes sharp with intelligence. Kalia, the gentle strength he never recognized now, an anchor of compassion and wisdom. He saw not 3 abandoned daughters, but 3 women he had no right to claim anymore. 3 women who had built themselves from the rubble of his cruelty. Forgive me, he whispered helplessly. I beg you, forgive me. Kalia approached him slowly and rested her hand on his shoulder. We're not ready, she said gently. Aisha nodded. Forgiveness is a journey. And you're at the beginning, Nuru added. But you cannot stay here alone. This house is no longer safe. You must let us help. He straightened slightly, a remnant of pride flickering. I don't need your charity. Aisha didn't flinch. It's not charity, it's responsibility. We're buying this property as part of the acquisition. You can't remain here after it's condemned. His eyes widened. Condemned. Nuru reached into her bag and placed documents on the dusty table. The foundation is collapsing. The structure isn't safe. This house could fall on you any moment. Mbwana stared at the papers, disbelief growing. This mansion, this home I built. Aisha interrupted softly. It was never a home. Not for us, not even for you. His throat tightened. He looked around at the cracked walls, the water stains, the shattered frames on the floor. And the truth struck him like lightning. The mansion reflected his soul. Beautiful once, but rotten from the inside. Where will I go? He whispered, shame and fear trembling in his voice. And the moment he asked the question, silently, unbearably, something shifted between them. No longer was he the man who once believed daughters held no value. Now, he was simply an old man, facing the consequences of his pride. Kalia stepped forward. Come with us. Aisha and Nuru turned to her, surprised. Kalia continued. We'll take you to one of our housing developments. Not as a favor, not as an apology for the past, but as a chance for all of us to begin again. Tears slipped from Mbwana's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, as if ashamed to show weakness. I don't deserve this. Aisha met his gaze, her expression unreadable. No, you don't, he flinched. But she continued, we didn't come to measure what you deserve. We came to decide what comes next. That distinction pierced him deeper than any accusation. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. Then, I will come. Kalia smiled gently. Good. The next morning, the sisters returned with a moving team. Mbwana owned almost nothing worth keeping, just a few boxes of clothing, old ledgers, and a rusted trunk containing faded memories he had ignored for decades. As he walked through the mansion for the last time, he paused at the doorway, exactly where he once forced Kalima and 3 crying daughters into the storm. He reached out and touched the frame with trembling fingers. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know what I was losing. Aisha stopped behind him. We knew. We carried that night with us. He turned to her, eyes wet. I'm sorry. Aisha stared at him for a long, heavy moment. Then she said quietly, Sorry doesn't erase anything, but it opens a door. He nodded slowly. A door, not an ending. They drove him to one of Rising Roots Development's newest housing communities. The houses were small but beautifully designed, bright, sustainable, safe. Children played in open courtyards. Gardens bloomed along the pathways. Elderly residents sat on porches drinking tea. It was everything the old mansion never was. Alive, warm, human. As Mbwana stepped out of the car, residents recognized the sisters immediately. They waved, greeted them, and welcomed them warmly. Then they saw the man behind them. A few whispers fluttered through the air. Is that him, the father who abandoned them? Look how the tables have turned. Mbwana's shoulders tensed. Aisha noticed and stepped closer. Ignore them. People talk when they don't understand. He nodded, though. Embarrassment still clouded his face. Nuru guided him to a modest but comfortable home. This is yours. He stared at the little house, sunlit, quiet, peaceful. It's beautiful. Kalia smiled. This is what love builds. His breath hitched. He stepped inside. The living room was simple but clean. A small kitchen, a bedroom with soft colors, a desk near the window, a shelf waiting to be filled. For a moment he couldn't speak. Finally he whispered, I don't know how to live like this. Aisha replied, then we'll teach you. He turned to her, his face breaking. Why? Why would you help a man who failed you so completely? Aisha answered quietly the truth she had waited 20 years to say. Because your failure isn't our identity, Nuru added. We built ourselves without you. Kalia stepped forward. And now we're giving you a chance to rebuild yourself with us. The old man covered his face and wept silently, not out of sorrow, but out of understanding. For the first time in his life, he saw the true strength of daughters. And he realized sons had never been the legacy he needed. His daughters were. The weeks that followed were a quiet, uneasy transition, a fragile period where old wounds brushed against new beginnings. The small house the sisters placed Mbwana in was modest compared to his former mansion. Yet every morning, he woke with a strange heaviness as though struggling to accept the simplicity around him. He no longer rose to servants waiting. No polished marble floors echoed his footsteps. No employees rushed to obey his orders. Instead, birdsong greeted him at dawn. Children laughed in the courtyard. Neighbors waved as they watered their gardens. And in this world, nobody bowed to him. For a man who once demanded respect like the air he breathed, the adjustment was excruciating. Inside the new home, he often sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the walls as if expecting them to speak. Every object felt foreign. A kettle, he didn't know how to use a bed. He didn't feel worthy of resting in a shelf without trophies or awards to validate him. The silence pressed on him harder than any criticism he had ever received. One morning a knock sounded at his door. He hesitated before opening it. There stood Kalia holding a grocery bag and smiling softly. Her presence always reminded him of Kalima, not physically, but in the way she carried calmness with her, like a cloak. I brought you some essentials, she said gently. Coffee, breadfruits, and your medication. He stepped aside to let her in, his voice rough. You didn't have to do that. Kalia shook her head. I know, but I wanted to. She placed the items neatly on the counter before moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. Mbwana watched her, feeling an unfamiliar pinch in his chest. She opened cabinets, adjusted items, and finally said, You've barely used anything. Are you eating properly? He swallowed. I don't know how to do this. Kalia paused. Live alone, he nodded. She studied him carefully, then spoke in her gentle but firm tone. You weren't alone all your life, Father. You had us. You just didn't choose us. The truth didn't come to hurt him. It came as a mirror he could no longer avoid. He sank into a chair. I thought I needed a son. I thought a son made a man powerful. Kalia sat across from him. Power without love is empty. He bowed his head. She reached for his hand. Let us help you learn a different life. One that isn't built on fear or pride. His voice shook. Do you think it's too late? Kalia squeezed his hand gently. Not if you try. Over the next few days, she visited him often. She taught him how to cook simple meals, helped him clean the house, and slowly eased him into a routine. On one visit, she brought him a notebook. What is this? He asked. A journal, she replied. Write your thoughts. If you can't speak to us yet, write. He stared at the blank pages long after she left. While Kalia worked on his emotional stability, Aisha and Nuru dealt with the remnants of his collapsing empire. Chisolo Estates was a labyrinth of expired permits, unpaid loans, and half-finished buildings eaten by rust and neglect. Entire communities had been affected by the company's failures, delayed construction, housing shortages, job losses. Aisha stood on the balcony of the former Chisolo Estates headquarters overlooking the city. The building was tall but hollow, like a monument to arrogance. Nuru joined her, carrying reports. It's worse than we thought, Nuru said, handing her the documents. Some of these projects have been abandoned for 7 years. Aisha clenched her jaw. We can fix them, maybe, Nuru replied. But it'll take time, money, and patience. Aisha exhaled slowly. We have all three. Nuru stared at the city lights. I sometimes wonder how he let everything fall apart like this. Aisha didn't answer immediately. She placed her hands on the railing, her expression distant. Because he wasn't building a company, she said quietly. He was building a throne. Nuru nodded slowly. And thrones built on pride always collapse. Aisha closed the file. Let's rebuild, not for him, for the people who depended on him. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, reluctantly, the community began to see changes. The sisters hired back former workers, reopened sites, and completed abandoned projects. They held community meetings, listened to complaints, and made plans to rebuild trust in the brand that once disappointed so many. Meanwhile, news of the takeover continued to circulate. Some praised the sisters as heroes. Others criticized them for involving themselves with the father who had once cast them out. But the opinions of strangers didn't matter. What mattered was the slow, fragile transformation happening inside their father. One afternoon, Aisha received a call. Aisha Kalia whispered urgently, "You need to come, both of you, now." Aisha and Nuru rushed to their father's house. They found him sitting on the floor of his living room holding the journal Kalia gifted him. His hands were shaking. Nuru knelt beside him. "Father, what happened?" He handed her the journal silently. Aisha and Nuru read the first few pages. They were filled with shaky handwriting. "I am learning to be alone. It is harder than ruling a mansion full of servants. My daughters bring me food. I don't understand why. I see their mother in them. It hurts." Then the next page is, "I wish I could go back in time. I wanted a son because I felt weak. I wanted proof I was strong, but I see now I was the weakest of them all. And finally, how do I ask for forgiveness when I don't deserve it? How do I become a father at the end of my life?" Aisha felt something inside her shift. Not forgiveness, but understanding. Nuru wiped a tear. "Father, why didn't you tell us you felt this way?" His voice cracked. "I didn't know how." Aisha put the journal aside. "Then learn. Start with speaking." He looked up at her, at all three of them, eyes filled with fear, humility, and a desperation he had never shown before. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am sorry for the storm, for the door, for the words, for the hate, for the pride, for everything." A long silence followed. Finally, Nuru placed her hand on his shoulder. "We hear you." Kalia took his hand. "We see you trying." Aisha inhaled deeply. "But forgiveness comes slowly. You will have to earn it." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will try," he whispered. "I will try every day." Kalia hugged him gently. For the first time in 20 years, he did not pull away. That night, after they left his home, the sisters walked together in silence. It was Aisha who finally spoke. "He's changing," Nuru nodded. "Pain changes people," Kalia added, "and love can rebuild them." Aisha looked up at the stars. "This journey isn't over." "No," Nuru agreed. "But this time, we walk together." And so the sisters continued forward toward healing, toward rebuilding, and toward the lesson their father had yet to fully learn. That daughters were never a burden. They were the legacy. The slow mending between father and daughters had only just begun when a shadow darker than their past crept into their lives. It started with a phone call, a trembling voice, an urgency too raw to ignore. It was Aunt Yambi. Her breasts were ragged, and the moment Aisha answered, she knew something was wrong. "Child, it's your mother." Aisha's stomach dropped. "Mama, what about her? Her illness has worsened. She's asking for you. All of you, come quickly." Aisha didn't wait. She didn't speak. She simply ran. Nuru and Kalia followed without question, dread clawing at their chests. They drove in silence, the kind of silence that squeezes the air from a room and fills every space with fear. The headlights cut through the evening darkness as if racing time itself. And somewhere in that race, Aisha whispered to no one in particular, "Not now. Please, not now." When they arrived at Aunt Yambi's house, they saw Kalima lying in bed, her once strong body frail, her breath shallow. Her skin was pale, her cheeks hollowed, and the spark that once lit her eyes flickered weakly like a dying candle. "Mama?" Kalia whispered, her voice breaking. Kalima opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw her daughters, tears shimmered at the corners. "My girls," she murmured, reaching out with trembling fingers. They rushed to her side, each gripping her hands, each swallowing tears that burned their throats. Aunt Yambi stood nearby, eyes red. Her heart is failing. The stress, the years of hardship, the illness caught up with her. She's been fighting too long. Aisha's voice quivered. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Kalima answered before Aunt Yambi could. Because I didn't want to be a burden. I knew you girls had so much to carry already. No, Nuru cried, softly shaking her head. You were never a burden. You were our strength. Kalima smiled weakly. I'm proud of you, all of you. You became everything I prayed for. Aisha leaned closer. We still need you, Mama. Please. Fight a little longer. Kalima's hand brushed her cheek with the tenderness only a mother could give. Aisha, my brave one. You don't need me to guide you anymore. You guide yourselves. Kalia sobbed into her chest. But what about Father? A long silence followed. Kalima's eyes softened with sadness that carried decades of pain. I heard he's changing. Aisha swallowed painfully. He's trying. Kalima nodded gently, then let him. Nuru frowned. Do you forgive him? Kalima's answer came slowly, as fragile as her breath. I forgave him long ago. Not because he deserved it, but because it set me free. But I could never forget the night he threw us out. Nor should you forget. The sisters exchanged emotional looks. Kalima continued, voice weakening. But don't let hatred poison what you've built. Your lives, your love for each other, your strength. Those are victories he could never take from you. Her breaths became shallower. The room felt tighter. The world suddenly too quiet. She whispered, Where is he? Aisha felt her heart drop. Mama, do you want to see him? Kalima nodded faintly. A mother's heart never fully closes. Bring him. The sisters exchanged looks, fear, hesitation, uncertainty, but Kalia stood up immediately. I'll get him. Aisha and Nuru followed. They drove back to their father's home, each second feeling heavier than the last. When they reached the little house, they found Bwana sitting at the table writing in his journal. He looked up when they entered and froze. Nuru's voice was tight. Father, Mama, she's very sick. Something shattered inside him. The color drained from his face. Kalima, no, not her, Aisha whispered. She wants to see you. He stood so abruptly his chair toppled over. Take me. Now. The drive was silent until suddenly it wasn't. And Bwana began to cry. Not quietly, not with restraint. He wept like a man crushed by the weight of every mistake he ever made. I should have found her. I should have apologized years ago. What have I done? What have I done? Aisha didn't comfort him. But she didn't stop him either. Some grief needed to bleed out. When they arrived, Mbwana nearly ran into the house. He stumbled into the room, fell to his knees beside Kalima, and grabbed her hand as though afraid she might slip away the moment he let go. Kalima, his voice broke. My wife, my love, forgive me. Kalima opened her eyes, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Mbwana, you came. He clutched her hand tighter. I failed you. I failed our daughters. I failed our family. If I could trade my life for yours, I would. Kalima's fingers brushed his cheek. Hush. You always were. Dramatic. A faint laugh escaped her lips, delicate and heartbreaking. Mbwana lowered his head onto her hand, shaking. I'm sorry. For everything, for every pain, for every storm, for every night you wept because of me. Kalima whispered, I forgive you. Tears streamed down his face. I don't deserve it. Forgiveness, she breathed, is a gift, not a reward. The sisters watched silently, hearts heavy yet softened by the sight of their parents, broken, human, vulnerable. Kalima looked at her daughters next. Take care of each other, always. Kalia sobbed openly now. We will, I promise. Kalima's gaze returned to Mbwana, her voice barely audible. Take care of our girls, even if late. He nodded frantically. I will. I swear it. Her eyes softened with peace. My family, she exhaled slowly, deeply. Then her chest stilled, and the woman who carried them all through storms, hunger, heartbreak, and rejection, took her final breath. Aisha broke first. Her cry tore from her chest like something long buried was trying to escape. Nuru fell against her, shaking violently. Kalia collapsed beside the bed, clutching her mother's hand as if she could hold her soul back. Mbwana didn't move. He held Kalima's hand to his forehead, his body trembling. A sound escaped him, raw, guttural, wounded. The sound of a man who finally realized what he lost the night he pushed her into the rain. Aisha eventually placed a hand on his back, not in comfort but in acknowledgement. The pain in that room was not divided, it was shared. Because for all the hurt, all the anger, all the scars, they had all loved her. And now they had all lost her. The following days were a blur of grief. The funeral drew hundreds of people whose lives Kaliма touched with kindness, wisdom, and quiet strength. The sisters stood together as mourners spoke of her generosity, her resilience, her courage. But the most shocking eulogy came from Mbwana himself. He stepped forward, voice trembling, and said, "She was the strongest person I ever knew. I spent my life chasing a legacy, but she was the legacy. I rejected my daughters trying to build a name, but she built a family without me. I thought having a son made a man powerful, but it is daughters who teach a man what strength truly is." Silence pierced the air. Aisha looked at him, not with forgiveness, but with the beginning of something close to understanding. That night after the burial, the sisters sat together in their mother's empty room. Aisha whispered, "She forgave him." Nuru wiped her eyes. "She always had a softer heart than we did." Kalia murmured, "But she asked him to take care of us. She wanted him to change." Aisha exhaled deeply. "Then let's give him the chance she believed in." They looked at each other, three women shaped by pain, strengthened by love, united by loss. And in the silence of the room, a new vow formed between them. They would honor their mother, not with revenge, but with transformation, for themselves, for each other, and maybe even for him. The grief that followed Kalima's passing did not fade quickly. It settled into the corners of their lives like dust, quiet, constant, impossible to ignore. For weeks, the sisters moved as though weighted by invisible chains. Their mother had been their compass, their shelter, their anchor, in the darkest moments of their childhood. Without her, the world felt colder, emptier, and far too silent. But if grief softened the sisters, it crushed Mbwana. He moved into the small home the sisters had provided, but he barely left the bedroom. He refused food, rejected visitors, and sat for hours staring at the journal Kalia had given him. He rarely wrote in it now. Instead, he simply held it thumb, brushing over the pages as though hoping Kalima's forgiveness had been etched into the margins. One morning, when Kalia came to bring him breakfast, she found him sitting on the floor, holding a faded crease photograph. It was one she had never seen before, Kalima on their wedding day smiling brightly, looking at her husband with love. "Father," she whispered. He didn't look up. "She loved me," he murmured. "Even when I didn't deserve it, she stayed. Even when I turned into a monster." Kalia knelt beside him. "She didn't want you to punish yourself. She wanted you to change." He shook his head bitterly. "Change? At my age, what's left to fix?" Kalia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Your relationship with us." The simplicity of her words made his breath hitch. "She wanted you to take care of us," Kalia continued softly. "Not as an apology, but as a father." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I don't know how. We can teach you," she whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. 2 weeks after the funeral, the sisters returned to work. Not because they were ready, but because thousands of people depended on Rising Roots development and the newly acquired Chiselo estates. Their mother's dream was for them to rise, and rising required movement, even when hearts were heavy. But the company was falling into deeper crisis. The more they uncovered, the worse it became. Unpaid wages from years prior sparked protests. Abandoned housing sites became hazards for nearby communities. Former investors threatened lawsuits due to incomplete contracts. Suppliers demanded overdue payments. One afternoon, Aisha slammed a folder onto her desk, frustration shaking her shoulders. "This is madness. Father didn't just run this company poorly, he buried it alive." Nuru rubbed her forehead, eyes exhausted. "I know, but we can still save it." "Can we?" Aisha retorted. "This isn't a salvage operation anymore. It's a full resurrection." Kalia, standing by the window, spoke softly. "Then resurrect it, for Mama." Silence fell, because that was the only reason big enough to keep them going. Aisha exhaled shakily. "All right, then we rebuild, brick by brick." And rebuild they did. The sisters spent the next months working around the clock. They attended meetings, renegotiated contracts, hired new teams, and brought transparency to the business, a concept their father had never understood. Aisha handled financial restructuring, speaking with banks and former investors. Her confident presence slowly restored trust. Nuru visited each abandoned site, meeting workers face to face, listening to their frustrations, sketching plans to revive projects long forgotten. Kalia worked with communities, directly counseling families affected by delays and designing support programs for those who had suffered the most under the company's collapse. They didn't just rebuild structures. They rebuilt faith. And in the process, something unexpected began to shift among the people. They began to speak the name Chizulo again, not with bitterness, but with hope. Aisha noticed it first. Then Nuru. Then Kalia. And eventually the whispers reached Mbwana. One afternoon, the sisters received a call from him. Aisha, are you busy? She stiffened. Hearing him call her by name still felt strange. We're always busy. Why, I want to help. Aisha almost dropped the phone. Nuru, sitting across from her at the conference table, raised her eyebrow. Kalia looked hopeful. Help? How? Aisha asked carefully. I know the land better than anyone, he replied. The history of the communities, the families, the reasons certain projects failed, things you won't find in files. Aisha's heart tightened with conflicting emotions. Trust was a fragile thing, and she wasn't ready to hand it to him carelessly. We'll think about it, she said. She hung up. Kalia sighed. Aisha, Mama asked him to take care of us. Maybe this is his way. Aisha didn't respond. The hurt was still too deep. But 2 days later, when they visited, the largest abandoned site once meant to be a luxury housing community, but now nothing but rusted metal and broken cement, they found a familiar figure standing near the gate, hands behind his back. Mbwana. No one invited you, Aisha said cautiously. I know, he replied, but you needed someone who remembers why this site failed. And why did it fail? Nuru challenged. He pointed at the ground. The soil. Too loose. Your architects would have discovered it too late. That's why the foundations collapsed. Nuru narrowed her eyes. How do you know that? He sighed. Because I ignored the engineers who warned me. Aisha and Nuru exchanged a look equal parts disbelief and anger. So let me help you not repeat my mistakes, he said quietly. Kalia whispered to her sisters, give him a chance. After a long silence, Aisha finally nodded. One chance. That day was the first time in their lives they worked alongside their father, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as people trying to rebuild the same world. Over the following weeks, the changes in Mbwana grew noticeable. He woke early, helped on construction sites, listened more than he spoke, apologized when he made mistakes, consulted the sisters before giving advice, even laughed sometimes softly, awkwardly, like someone learning the language of joy for the first time. Workers were shocked. Is this really the same man he used to yell more than he breathed? He's changing, and he was. But change is not linear nor painless. One afternoon after a long meeting, Aisha found him staring at an old blueprint in a quiet corner of the office. Father, she asked. He looked up, eyes watery. I wasted so many years. Aisha exhaled slowly. We can't change the past. He shook his head. But I can change myself for whatever is left. She hesitated, then sat beside him. For the first time they spoke without anger narrowing the space between them. They talked about Kalima, about the years he lost, about the things he wished he could rewind. And Aisha, for the first time, saw not the tyrant who threw her into the rain, but the broken man trying to step out from under his old sins. It was not forgiveness, but it was the beginning of acceptance. The turning point came unexpectedly. It happened during a community meeting where residents demanded answers about an unfinished project from years ago. The room buzzed with frustration, shouting accusations, distrust. Aisha stepped forward to address them, but before she could speak, someone shouted, Where was your father when all this happened? Why should we trust you? The room erupted in loud agreement. Then Mbwana did something no one expected. He stood. I was the one who failed you, he announced. His voice shook, but not from fear, from honesty. The room went silent. He continued, Your anger is justified. I made decisions based on pride, not responsibility. I ignored warnings. I ignored you. I hurt communities that trusted me. A murmur rippled. He bowed his head. A gesture that shocked everyone, including his daughters. I cannot undo the past. But I can stand beside my daughters and make amends. Not as a leader, but as a man learning from his mistakes. A heavy, stunned quiet filled the room. Aisha's lips parted in disbelief. Nuru's eyes filled with tears. Kalia covered her mouth, refusing to cry openly. In that moment, for the first time in the sisters' lives, they saw the father they had always wanted, not perfect, not powerful, but humble and trying. After the meeting, Aisha approached him quietly. That was brave, she said. He shook his head. It was necessary. Nuru added, Mama would have been proud. He closed his eyes. I hope so. And for the first time, Aisha gently placed her hand on his arm. He did not flinch. He smiled, small, fragile, but real. That night, the sisters met on the rooftop of their office building. The city lights glowed beneath them like a sea of tiny suns. Aisha whispered, "He's changing." Nuru nodded, "And so are we." Kalia added with a soft smile, "Maybe healing isn't one moment. Maybe it's a journey we're all walking together." They stood quietly, letting the wind brush through their hair. Below them, the world moved. Above them, the stars glimmered. Around them, healing continued, slow, imperfect, but finally possible. And somewhere inside that little home in the Rising Roots community, an old man sat writing in his journal today. "For the first time, I felt like a father." The healing between the sisters and their father moved like a cautious tide, advancing slowly, pulling back occasionally, but always returning with a bit more strength. Some days, Moana seemed grounded and hopeful, genuinely determined to rebuild himself. Other days, guilt dragged him backward into silence, and he withdrew into long, lonely reflections. But even on the darkest days, there was one undeniable truth he was trying, and that was something he had never done before. For the sisters, especially Aisha, the journey was not easy. Forgiveness wasn't a door she could simply open. It was a weight she had to lift every day. Sometimes she managed it, sometimes she didn't. One morning, the sisters gathered in their office to review progress on the revived Chisolo Estates projects. Nuru spread blueprints across the conference table, while Kalia updated community impact reports. Aisha stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, arms crossed, her mind clearly elsewhere. "You're thinking about Father," Kalia said softly. Aisha didn't turn around. "I'm thinking about everything." Nuru looked up. "What happened?" Aisha exhaled. "He asked me yesterday what he would have been like as a father if he had chosen differently." Kalia and Nuru exchanged a glance. "And what did you say?" Kalia asked. "I didn't know what to say," Aisha replied, voice tight. "I've spent half my life being angry at him and the other half trying to succeed without needing him. I never imagined what he could have been, only what he wasn't." Nuru came over and touched her arm. "You don't have to imagine it alone anymore. He's here. He's showing us." Aisha shook her head slightly. "But is it enough?" Kalia answered gently. "Forgiveness isn't about enough. It's about allowing the wound to close. Slowly." Aisha finally turned around, her eyes heavy. "Then why does it feel like the wound keeps reopening?" No one answered. Some questions required time, not logic. Later that week, the sisters scheduled a formal review meeting at one of their newly renovated community centers, an ambitious project built on land previously owned by their father's company. The meeting was critical. Government representatives, investors, architects, and community leaders would be present. Success here meant nationwide expansion. Failure would stall everything. It was the biggest moment in their company's history, and they decided to bring their father. They didn't tell him immediately. They didn't want him to panic or retreat. Instead, they visited him 2 days before the meeting. He was tending to a small garden outside his home, a new hobby Kalia had encouraged. He knelt among rows of herbs and vegetables, hands sunk in the soil, his posture calm. It struck Aisha how ironic it was, the man who once ruled an empire, now finding peace in the quiet act of planting life. Father Aisha called gently. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Girls, you're early. We wanted to talk," Nuru said. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Everything all right?" Aisha exchanged a small glance with her sisters. "We want you to come with us to the review meeting on Friday." He froze. "Me," he whispered. "You want me there?" "Yes," Kalia said with a gentle smile. "If you're willing." He blinked rapidly, clearly overwhelmed. "Girls, I don't want to embarrass you." "The people there, you won't embarrass us," Aisha said, firm but soft. "Just be honest, be yourself." He nodded slowly, as if afraid the moment might collapse if he moved too quickly. I'll be there." The day of the meeting arrived with the electric tension of a storm about to break. The newly rebuilt community center stood tall, sleek lines, warm colors, large windows, letting in natural light. It was the kind of building that didn't just serve people, it uplifted them. Inside the conference hall buzzed with excitement and skepticism. Many attendees had suffered from Chisolo Estates' failures in the past. Some were wary of the sisters' takeover. Others were hopeful. Aisha stood at the podium, poised and confident. Nuru had her architectural models ready. Kalia had her community impact slides lined up. But as the meeting start time approached, Aisha scanned the room. No sign of him. Her heart tightened. "He'll come," Kalia whispered reassuringly, but Aisha wasn't sure. Forgiveness was fragile. So was courage. Finally, with only minutes remaining, the doors opened. Mbwana stepped in. He wore a simple suit, clean-pressed but modest. His shoulders were slightly hunched, but his eyes were determined. When he saw his daughters at the front, he offered a small, trembling nod. Aisha exhaled relief, washing over her. The meeting began. She delivered a powerful presentation about financial restructuring. Nuru unveiled their plans to transform old Chisolo Estates land into sustainable community-centered neighborhoods. Kalia spoke about the emotional importance of rebuilding trust and dignity. The audience was moved but also wary. Then one of the government officials asked sharply, "This is all impressive, but how can we trust a company tied to a man who caused so much harm? How do we know history won't repeat itself?" A tense hush fell over the room. Aisha opened her mouth to respond, but someone else stood first. Mbwana. He walked slowly to the front, shoulders visibly shaking, but every step steady with purpose. He faced the audience. "I am the history you speak of," he began. "And for most of my life I lived in pride, arrogance, and blindness. I hurt communities. I hurt my employees. I hurt my own family." The room fell silent. He continued, "I thought having a son would make me strong, but it was my daughters who taught me what strength truly is." Aisha felt her throat tighten. Nuru grabbed her hand under the table. Kalia wiped tears silently. Mbwana's voice wavered but didn't break. "I failed this region. I failed these projects. I failed the people who trusted me. But my daughters, these three extraordinary women, have done what I never had the courage to do." He gestured toward them. "They chose to rebuild, to restore what I broke. They are not my redemption, but they are the future this community deserves." He bowed his head. "For what it's worth, I stand before you, not as their superior, but as their student." A stunned silence swept the room. Then slowly people began to nod. Whispers floated. "He's admitting it. At least he's honest now. The daughters have truly changed everything." A government official stood and said, "Thank you for your transparency, Mr. Chisolo. We will take this into account." The meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. For the first time, Chisolo Estates wasn't associated with shame. It was associated with transformation. After the meeting, as attendees mingled and congratulated the sisters, Aisha found her father standing alone near a window, breathing deeply. "You were brave," she said. He looked at her with eyes filled with gratitude and regret. "I was honest." Finally, Nuru joined them. "You helped more than you know." Kalia hugged him softly. "Mama would have cried seeing you today." Good tears. Mbwana's chin trembled. "I miss her every day." "So do we," Aisha whispered. He placed a hand over his heart. "Thank you for letting me try." They didn't answer with words, but their presence, their closeness, their acceptance was enough. That night, the sisters gathered again on their office rooftop, watching the stars. Aisha whispered, "We're getting closer to peace." Nuru nodded. "Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of healing." Kalia smiled. "And he's healing too." Slowly. Aisha looked at the city below, at the buildings they restored, the communities they revived, the legacy they reclaimed. "We're rewriting our story," she said. "No," Nuru corrected gently. "We're reclaiming it." And above them, the stars shimmered, as though bearing witness to a truth 20 years overdue. The daughters had returned, not with vengeance, but with strength. And the lesson their father needed had only just begun. The transformation of Chisolo Estates was no longer just a business revival. It had become the redemption arc of an entire family. But true lessons do not settle gently. They arrive in waves, pressing into the places where truth has been avoided the longest. And now that Mbwana was finally walking forward, life began arranging the tests he needed to face. One such test arrived early one morning when Aisha received a call from the head contractor at their largest redevelopment site. "There's a problem with the East Foundation," he reported. "It's unstable. If we continue without redesigning, the entire row could collapse." Aisha stiffened. That land was cleared. How can the foundation still be compromised? The contractor hesitated. "It's the same issue from years ago. The one your father ignored." A cold weight settled in Aisha's chest. Ignoring engineering warnings, skipping soil reinforcements, rushing construction to satisfy investors. These were the sins that once carried the Chisolo name. Aisha hung up and immediately called Nuru and Kalia. They gathered at the site within the hour, the rising sun casting long shadows over the uneven ground. Workers stood in clusters, murmuring anxiously. Nuru walked the perimeter, slowly analyzing every inch, her eyebrows furrowed. This isn't a simple mistake, she said. It's structural negligence. Years of it. Kalia knelt down and touched the soil, her expression pained. Families were supposed to live here. Children. Aisha inhaled sharply, fighting the old anger that pressed against her ribs. We need to fix it, whatever it costs. But solving the issue required understanding every shortcut, every ignored report, every oversight. And there was only one person who knew the full story, their father. Calling him felt like reopening old wounds. But healing required truth, even when the truth was ugly. When they arrived at his small house, they found him reading the journal again. He looked up, sensing their urgency. What happened? He asked. Aisha didn't soften her tone. The East foundation of the new project is failing. It's the same problem you ignored years ago. He froze. Nuru continued, her voice tight. We need to know everything. Every detail. Every warning you dismissed. Kalia added softly. Lives depend on this. Mbwana swallowed hard, then stood. I'll come with you. They drove back to the site. As soon as he stepped out of the car, the workers fell silent. Some recognized him, some glared, some whispered. The weight of his past hung in the air like dust. He walked the land slowly, stopping near the shallow trenches. His eyes scanned the soil, the slope, the drainage pattern. Memories flashed painfully. Arguments with the former chief engineer, the reports he tossed aside, the pressure he put on everyone to push forward despite risks. I remember, he murmured. I ignored them. I ignored all of them. Aisha crossed her arms. We can't fix what we don't understand. He knelt, pressing his fingers into the dirt. The soil was always too loose. We needed deeper pile foundations, reinforced concrete beams. But I didn't want to spend more money. I was obsessed with finishing quickly. Nuru knelt beside him. So how do we fix it? He looked up at her with hollow, regretful eyes. You'll need to redesign the entire support system. It will cost millions. Aisha inhaled slowly. Then we'll spend millions. He closed his eyes. This is my fault. Aisha's voice softened, but only slightly. Yes, and now you help us fix it. It was the first time she had acknowledged his role without bitterness slashing through her words. Together, the sisters and their father worked through the day, reviewing old reports, consulting engineers, recalculating load capacity. For hours, they stood in the sun, sweat, and dust, marking their clothes. Workers watched in awe as the infamous patriarch worked beside his daughters, asking questions, taking notes, listening, truly listening. By sunset, the redesign plan was complete. We can fix this, Nuru said confidently, rolling up the blueprint. And do it properly, Aisha added. Their father looked at them with a strange mixture of pride and grief. You are the leaders I never was. Kalia smiled gently. Then become the man Mama hoped you could be. And for once, he didn't look away. Over the following weeks, the reconstruction became a symbol of unity, not just for the community, but for the family itself. Residents visited the site and saw all three sisters working alongside their father, guiding contractors, checking materials, and ensuring nothing was overlooked. Whispers began spreading throughout the region. He's changed. He's finally making things right. His daughters saved him. No, he's learning from them. The transformation wasn't perfect. There were days when old habits resurfaced, when his pride flared, when he questioned decisions too sharply, when he forgot that he wasn't in charge anymore. But each time, one of his daughters reminded him gently, firmly, we work together now, and slowly he learned. One late afternoon, after a long day on the site, Mbwana approached Aisha as she reviewed documents in their temporary field office. Aisha, he said. She didn't look up immediately. I want to tell you something. Something I should have said years ago. She lifted her eyes. His hands were shaking slightly. You were always enough, he whispered. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Her breath caught. Her heart trembled. She didn't speak, but her eyes glistened with emotions she didn't want to name. He continued, voice breaking. You were strong, smart, brave. I rejected you because I was weak, not because you were lacking. Aisha turned away, swallowing hard. It's too late to say that. He stepped closer but stopped a respectful distance away. Maybe it's too late to change the past, but it's not too late to honor it. Not too late to be different. Not too late to be a better man. For whatever time is left. She closed her eyes. His voice trembled. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. She said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the first step toward healing. And he accepted that. He walked away slowly, leaving her alone with the words she had wanted and needed to hear for 20 years. That night, the sisters gathered at Kalia's house. She had hosted dinner, warm, fragrant, comforting. They all sat together exhausted but satisfied with the progress of both the project and their father's growth. Aisha poked at her food absent-mindedly. "You're quiet," Nuru said. Aisha hesitated. "He told me something today." Kalia leaned forward. "What did he say? That I was always enough." The room fell silent. Aisha's voice softened. "I didn't know that hearing it would hurt as much as it healed." Kalia reached across the table and took her hand. "Healing hurts, because it touches old scars." Nuru nodded. "But Mama would want you to let the healing in?" Aisha looked at her sisters, her lifelong companions, through storms and sorrow. "I know," Kalia whispered. "We're not doing this for him, we're doing it for us." Aisha smiled faintly. "For Mama. Always." But life wasn't finished testing their father. One evening while walking back from a construction meeting, he suddenly stopped clutching his chest. Workers rushed to him shouting for help. The sisters received the call minutes later. When they reached the hospital, doctors informed them he had suffered a mild heart attack caused by years of stress, guilt, and unaddressed trauma. Aisha pressed a hand to her lips, holding back tears. Nuru's eyes filled instantly. Kalia began praying under her breath. He was stable, but he needed to change his life drastically. And when he opened his eyes, the first faces he saw were his daughters. He whispered, "Not yet. I still have lessons to learn." Aisha took his hand gently. "We're here," she said softly, "and we're not going anywhere." For the first time in 2 decades, their father believed her. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, the latter coming from the diffuser Kalia secretly placed near the window to help calm their father. Machines hummed softly, monitoring his heartbeat with rhythmic precision. The faint beep, beep, beep filled the room, a quiet reminder of how fragile life could suddenly become. Mbwana lay weak but conscious, his once imposing frame now diminished beneath white sheets. Time had softened him, but the heart attack humbled him further. His body, once fueled by arrogance, now trembled from exhaustion. And yet when he looked at his daughters gathered around him, something warm flickered in his eyes, gratitude mixed with disbelief. "You should be at work," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You have an empire to run." Aisha shook her head. "Your family. That comes first." He blinked rapidly as if the words were foreign. "I never put family first." Nuru leaned closer. "Then let this be your new beginning." His throat tightened. For days they stayed by his side in shifts. Kalia read to him from his journal, not the painful parts, but the hopeful ones. Nuru brought architectural sketches to keep his mind active, asking for his thoughts to make him feel included. Aisha handled the doctors, the medical bills, the logistics, ensuring he lacked for nothing. He saw himself reflected in each of them. In Aisha's strength, he saw the leadership he once pretended to have. In Nuru's creativity, he saw the vision he never nurtured. In Kalia's compassion, he saw the gentleness that had long abandoned him. One afternoon, as sunlight poured gently through the window, he whispered, "How did you grow into such women without me?" Aisha paused before answering. "We grew because we had to," Nuru added softly. "Mama made sure we didn't drown in what you left behind." Kalia squeezed his hand. "And now you're here to help us finish what she started." He exhaled shakily, overwhelmed by a mixture of regret and hope. But healing was not a straight path. A few days into his recovery, as he grew stronger, his pride resurfaced, subtle but present. He tried to get out of bed against doctor's orders, insisting he wasn't weak. He criticized hospital food. He grew irritated when nurses fussed over him. "You almost died," Father Aisha warned. "You need to rest." "I don't want to be treated like a child," he snapped. Aisha's eyes darkened. "Then don't act like one." For a moment his old anger flared. But then, as if remembering everything he'd lost, it faded just as quickly. He sighed heavily. "You're right," he whispered. I don't know how to let myself be cared for." Kalia approached, her voice gentle. "Then let us teach you that too." He looked at her in stunned silence. His daughters weren't just rebuilding his business, they were rebuilding him. When he was discharged, the sisters insisted he return not to his small house, but to a new facility they had been developing, a holistic community care center designed for elderly residents recovering from illness and trauma. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I used to ignore these kinds of projects," he said quietly, staring at the building's modern design and lush gardens. "Thought they were useless." Aisha nodded. And now he looked at the residents exercising in the courtyard, at staff guiding them with patience, at the warm colors of the walls, and the fresh air flowing through open corridors. Now I see they're necessary, he admitted. Kalia smiled. Welcome home. He blinked back unexpected tears. As he settled into the center, something extraordinary happened. He began to interact with people, really interact. The other residents were curious about him, especially once they learned he was the biological father of the women transforming the region. He shared stories, not the triumphant ones he used to tell, but honest ones. Stories of failure, regret, lost years, the harm caused by stubborn dreams. And to his surprise, people listened. One elderly man said, "You're lucky. At least you have the chance to make amends." Another added, "Most of us never get that." Those words stayed with him. The care center had a therapy program led by a soft-spoken counselor named Madame Ithema. She specialized in emotional reconstruction for elders grappling with guilt or loneliness. She encouraged group therapy sessions, and one day, to the sisters' astonishment, Mbwana chose to attend. He sat in a circle with 8 other residents, all older, all bearing their own scars. At first, he said nothing. He listened as they shared stories of abandonment, failed marriages, distant children, regrets that kept them awake at night. Then Madame Ithema looked at him. "Mr. Chisolo, would you like to share?" His throat tightened. The man who once commanded boardrooms, ordered employees around, and silenced entire rooms, now struggled to speak. Finally, in a trembling voice, he said, "I hurt the people I love most, and I'm scared it's too late to heal what I broke." Silence fell. Then an elderly woman reached over and touched his wrist. "It's not too late," she said. "You're still here. Your daughters are still here. Give yourself permission to be forgiven." That night, he wrote in his journal for the first time in weeks. Maybe redemption is not something you earn, but something you grow into. The sisters visited often, and each visit marked a new small victory. One afternoon, they found him leading a gardening class. Another day, he helped an old man with mobility exercises. He even began attending financial literacy sessions, not to teach, but to learn. Who would have thought, Aisha whispered once, watching him from afar, that father would become the gentle one among them? Nuru smiled. Mama would. Kalia touched their shoulders. She believed in him before any of us did. Aisha nodded slowly. And maybe she was right. But the biggest shift came during a community appreciation event hosted at the center. Residents and families gathered to celebrate the success of the program, and the sisters were honored guests. Toward the end, to everyone's surprise, the director invited Mbwana to speak on behalf of the residents. He stepped to the front holding the microphone with trembling hands. "I came here as a broken man," he began, voice steady but emotional. "I thought age meant I didn't have to change, that my mistakes could stay buried, that I could build walls around my heart and call them strength." He glanced at his daughters, his voice cracked. "But daughters, they don't let you hide. They see through walls, through pride, through fear. They bring storms, but storms that wash the world clean." Aisha wiped her eyes. Nuru squeezed Kalia's hand. He continued, "I once rejected my daughters because I believed only a son could carry my legacy. But I was blind. The truth is, my daughters are my legacy. Not because they saved my company, but because they saved me." His voice broke completely at the end. "Forgiveness is not something I deserve, but their love has given me a chance to earn it, day by day." Thunderous applause filled the room. The sisters stood, tears streaming openly. He stepped down, and for the first time in their lives, his daughters embraced him, not with hesitation, but with a fragile, growing trust. A trust that acknowledged pain, a trust that honored healing, a trust that whispered, "We are walking forward now, together." That night, as they drove home, Aisha stared out the window, lost in thought. Nuru glanced at her. "You're quiet." Aisha took a deep breath. "I'm starting to understand something." "What?" Kalia asked. Aisha smiled faintly. "Forgiving him doesn't erase what he did, but it frees us from carrying it." Nuru nodded. "We're finally learning the lesson we came to teach," Kalia whispered. "And he's learning it too." Outside, the night was calm. Not silent, but calm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has passed and seeds begin to grow in the soil left behind. Kết thúc phần 14. You said tiếp tục yêu cầu viết 1.200 từ để tiếp tục câu chuyện, không viết tiêu đề mục vào trong kịch bản. ChatGPT said, Phần 15 months passed and the changes that had begun slowly, like cautious footsteps, grew into strides, strong enough to reshape not only the Chisulo family, but the entire community. The sisters watched their father evolve with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something even deeper, acceptance. And though forgiveness had not fully bloomed, its roots had already taken hold. The care center became a second home to him. Every morning he rose early, no longer out of compulsion or pride, but out of purpose. He helped other residents tend to their gardens. He mentored young volunteers and he participated actively in rehabilitation exercises. He even joined weekly therapy sessions where he spoke openly of his regrets, a vulnerability that once would have been unthinkable. But as he grew stronger physically and emotionally, he began to ask himself a question that lingered like a whisper. What can I do to truly make things right? It was Aisha who unknowingly gave him the answer. One morning, he sat quietly in the care center courtyard, sketching in his journal. The sisters arrived dressed in their work attire but smiling warmly. They had come to update him on the progress of the revived projects and the communities they'd built from the ashes of his old empire. We're launching something new, Aisha said, her eyes shining with purpose. Nuru handed him a folder. A free housing initiative for single mothers. Kalia added gently, in honor of Mama. He traced Kalima's name on the proposal with trembling fingers. Memories of her resilience, her strength, her sacrifice, her unwavering love surged through him, bringing a sting of tears. She would be proud, he whispered. She would, Aisha agreed. But it's not just a tribute, it's needed. So many women are where she once was abandoned, struggling, raising children alone. Nuru leaned forward. We want you to be part of this. Not financially, not symbolically. We want your hands in it. He blinked, taken aback. You want me to help? After everything, Kalia smiled warmly. Healing isn't one-sided. You helped break these families years ago. Now help build new ones. His heart tightened. I will. Whatever you need. Aisha nodded. We'll start next week. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel nervous about being included. He felt worthy of being part of something again. The following week marked the beginning of the project that would become the defining chapter of his redemption, the Kalima Housing Initiative. Under the sisters' leadership, they transformed a formerly abandoned Chizolo Estates land parcel, one that had once symbolized his failures, into a thriving construction site filled with hope. Mothers arrived with their children, volunteering their time alongside workers. Students from the care center came to help. Local builders joined, inspired by the sisters' leadership, and among them all, moving slowly but determinedly, was Mbwana. He lifted bricks, he planted trees, he carried water. He taught basic skills to volunteers. He listened to their stories with humility, stories that mirrored the suffering he had once caused, and the mothers who once resented the Chizolo name began to soften toward him. He's different now, one murmured, as he helped her carry lumber. I never thought I'd see him like this, another whispered. He heard their words but didn't let them distract him from the work. He was no longer focused on being seen. He was focused on giving back. One afternoon during a break, he sat under the shade of a newly planted jacaranda tree. Kalia joined him, holding 2 cups of ginger tea. You're working too hard, she teased gently. He chuckled softly. I have 20 years to make up for. Kalia handed him a cup. You don't have to erase the past, just build a better future. He gazed at her with gratitude. You speak like your mother. She taught me well. He nodded, looking at the bustling site. Children playing, women painting walls, workers laughing, hope filling the air like music. I used to think success was power, he murmured, but this feels more like success than anything I ever built. Kalia rested her head on his shoulder, something she had never done before. It's because this time you're not building alone. Weeks turned into months. The project blossomed and the community thrived. The sisters' company became the model of ethical, sustainable development, cited in newspapers, featured in documentaries, and admired across the region. But while the world celebrated the sisters, something else grew stronger behind the scenes, their bond with their father. One evening, after a long day at the site, Aisha invited him to their rooftop, her favorite place for reflection. The view overlooked the city, lit streets, new houses, community centers, and trails of life moving through the night. Do you remember what you told the community that day? Aisha asked softly. He nodded. That I was their student. She stepped beside him. And you still are. But you're also something else now. He turned to her carefully. What's that? She swallowed thickly. You're our father. His breath caught. Tears filled his eyes instantly. Aisha, he began, voice cracking. She raised a hand gently. I'm not saying everything is forgiven or forgotten, but I'm saying, I see you. I see what you're trying to be, and I'm ready to accept that. He bowed his head, overwhelmed. Thank you. That's more than I deserve, maybe, she said, but it's what Mama wanted. He looked up at the sky, whispering Kalima, if only you could see this. She can, Aisha whispered. She always could. They stood in silence. Two souls once severed, now stitched together slowly, thread by thread. The Kalima Housing Initiative reached completion on a warm evening bathed in golden light. A crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Mothers held their children proudly. Neighbors filled the pathways. Media cameras flashed. The sisters stood together, each radiating the strength their mother poured into them, and beside them, wearing a simple suit and a humbled smile, stood their father. Aisha stepped forward to speak. This project began as a promise to our mother, to our community, and to ourselves. But along the way, it became something more. It became proof that broken things can be rebuilt, that lost relationships can find their way back, that families can heal even after storms. Nuru opened the ribbon. Kalia signaled the children. Together, the sisters cut the ribbon. Cheers erupted. Mothers cried. Children laughed. Workers embraced. And the symbol of their triumph rose before them, a community built not on wealth but on wisdom, unity, and resilience. After the ceremony ended and people drifted home, the sisters remained with their father under the soft glow of lanterns. He looked at the homes, the gardens, the smiling families. Then he glanced at his daughters, three strong women standing as equals in the world he once tried to shape without them. I rejected you because I wanted a son, he whispered. But I see now, daughters teach a man how to live, how to love, how to change. Aisha touched his hand gently. Nuru leaned her head against his arm. Kalia wrapped her arms around them both. And for the first time in 20 years, he said the words he should have spoken the day they were born. My daughters, thank you for coming back to me. The three sisters, Aisha, Nuru, and Kalia, held him close. Not as the tyrant he once was, not as the man who threw them into the rain, but as the father he was finally learning to be. Under the lantern light, surrounded by the community they built together, the final lesson settled quietly, tenderly, deeply. Daughters were never the curse he believed. They were the miracle he never deserved, and the legacy he was blessed to live long enough to understand. Life does not always give us the family we want, but it gives us the truth we need. Mbwana learned too late that strength is not measured by pride or power, but by the courage to face one's failures and choose change. His daughters became the very proof that love is resilient, that forgiveness doesn't erase pain but transforms it, and that true legacy is built not from wealth or heirs, but from the hearts we impact and the lives we elevate. Healing is not instant. It is a journey walked step by hesitant step, guided by intention rather than perfection. In the end, the Chisolo family discovered that redemption is possible not because the past is forgotten, but because they chose to rise above it. Before you leave, share with us in the comments what part of this story touched you the most and where in the world are you watching from. And if you love emotional, powerful African folktale dramas, don't forget to subscribe to support the Bordeaux's channel.